When the National Center for Victims of Crime first entered the reform space, a lot of our partners wondered why exactly the National Center for Victims of Crime would ever advocate for prison reform. We heard your criticism, we did, and the concern, and those concerns are valid. But we still chose to enter this space, and that's for a lot of reasons. I first just want to throw out a couple of statistics from our partners at the Safety and Justice Challenge. 60% of victims surveyed believe that criminal justice systems should be more focused on rehabilitating in prisons. Conversely, only about 32% of victims believe that the system should focus on punishment. Similarly, 61% of victims state that they would prefer prison spending to include shorter prison sentences with a stronger focus on prevention and rehabilitation. Only about 25% said they preferred spending money to keep offenders incarcerated as long as possible. Victims by wide margins prefer investments in new safety priorities, such as a 15-to-1 preference on education, 10-to-1 preference on job creation, and 7-to-1 preference on mental health treatments in prison. Here's the most striking statistic for us, and we're going to come back to this a couple of times. 90% of the individuals who are incarcerated right now report a victimization prior to their incarceration. That's 90% of a population that likely didn't get services to help them deal with their trauma. So we have a lot of data that tells us that crime survivors prioritize a safety and justice system that actually works, with focuses on prevention, accountability, and recovery from harm. Survivors want to be part of that conversation on criminal justice reform, beyond punishment of their perpetrators. So given that, we had one very pragmatic reason for us to be in this conversation. We believe that victims must be at the table to discuss true and safe reform and to ensure that victims' rights and safety remain paramount. There are much more heartfelt reasons: forgiveness and redemption. And that's what we're here to discuss today. And that's the focus of our partnership with Cut 50 and the Reform Alliance and their redemption project. I think it's really important that we first emphasize that when we seek to encourage forgiveness and redemption, we are not putting aside any claims to justice. We are only asking that we surrender our right to vengeance. And there's a big difference between the two. In The Art of Forgiveness, Lewis Smedes explains, vengeance is our own pleasure at seeing someone who has hurt us get that hurt back. But justice is secured when a person pays a fair penalty for wronging another. To put it another way, vengeance is our own personal satisfaction. Justice is the moral accounting. True forgiveness happens when we give up our need for revenge and we recognize that those who harmed us are humans. They have frailty and shortcomings just like all of us, which leads me to my final point. NCVC supports and represents all victims of crime. Back to that number from before, all the research we have indicates that 90% of incarcerated individuals have had a traumatic experience or have been a victim of crime themselves. These folks, these individuals, these humans were likely unable to receive appropriate services to deal with their trauma. We see cycles of abuse and poly-victimization play out clearly in our criminal justice system. Incarceration, trauma, and victimization are inextricably linked. And we do have an obligation to ensure that all victims, incarcerated or not, have the ability and the resources to address past traumas and be given the opportunity to change their lives, really their chance at redemption. So we've partnered with Cut 50 and the Reform Alliance on this project in the hope of highlighting how justice reform can bring healing to all victims